I did think that this oversized blazer was a vibe, but looking at it in the viewfinder, it's kind of giving Uncle Fester.
You're a big, dumb, weird thing!
Da-da-da-da. Hey there guys, my name's Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back to Killer Weekend, where each week we'll discuss a new true crime case and you guys can feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments box below. If you like all things true crime news, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. I will leave a small disclaimer, this case does involve details of violent crime, sexual assault, domestic violence and stalking. If that's a trigger point for you, then please feel free to turn away now. And remember, if you've nothing nice to say,
nobody likes you.
Don't forget you can now tune in over on Spotify, so make sure to leave a big juicy 5-star review in support of the channel. Hi gremlins, how's you? I feel like we've not done a little gabby gab in quite a while. How are you dealing, with the world and the state that it's currently in? With that being said, I was out in the garden the other day, forcing my chihuahua to reluctantly do a poo outside in the rain, even though she hates it, and I felt that old familiar chill running down my spine. Yes, boys and girls, it is now spooky season. The taste of pumpkin spice and shopping for tacky decor will always have a special place in my heart. However, with the arrival of autumn, or fall as you guys say in the US, comes a whole new list of worries for us ladies. The darker nights and shorter days start rolling in, and pretty soon we will need to be a lot more aware of our surroundings. Now here in the UK, when autumn winter is in full swing, we're lucky to get about 7 hours of hard daylight, which is totally fine, unless like me, you're a woman. As a teen, I always remember being told to never go out walking after dark. Don't go anywhere alone after dark. If you're a man, I'm sure you've probably never heard these things, and that's for one reason only. Random instances of male-on-female violence aren't something that you need to be concerned about. You don't need to worry about your mum and dad reading things like, why was she out by herself at night? And why didn't she just leave him, if anything should ever go wrong? For those who've followed the channel for a while, you'll know that femicide and violence against women are the main reasons I started making videos in the first place. And listen, I'd love to sit here and tell you that things have gotten much better since I created this platform over 3 years ago. But sadly, that wouldn't be true. If you don't believe me, just pop on over to Instagram. Daily, women and those who identify as women are forced to look at what I can only describe as ignorance and downright misogyny in every comment section. Anytime organisations such as Women's Aid and Victims Support UK share anything regarding male-on-female violence, you can bet your bottom dollar that the Not All Men crew will never be far behind. As it currently stands, 91% of sexual assault victims are female, 74% of domestic violence victims are female. It's also important to mention that whilst males can certainly be the victims of both, 95% of domestic assaults are committed by men, and a staggering 98% of sexual assaults are too committed by men. Do male victims deserve to have a safe space in which they can discuss these issues as well? Of course, that isn't up for debate. But what isn't okay is when they go into the comment section of a women's rights charity only to say things like men are victims of domestic violence too and women can lie about rape. I'll just touch on this briefly since we're already on the topic. Only 1% of sexual assault allegations are falsely reported. 1%. So maybe think about that the next time you're putting your support behind the perpetrator over the potential survivor. Statistically, it's quite obvious that violence against women and girls is the epidemic here, the cancer we can't seem to rid from our society. And we, especially those of you who identify as male, need to ask why. From a young age, we're taught to never walk anywhere alone at night, always carry pepper spray, be vigilant of our surroundings, don't go to a stranger's house on a first date, don't be friendly but also don't be rude either, don't smile too much but smile when asked, and the list goes on and on. It's exhausting. However, to the gender that are perpetrating 90-ish% of these crimes, we ask one thing. Stop. Stop following us home. Stop sliding into our DMs with your nasty nudes. Stop coercing us into things that we don't want to do. And most importantly, stop pretending that this isn't your problem. According to a study published by the National Institute of Health, 1 in 3 men will commit some form of violent assault in their lifetime. But somehow, we, the women, are still paying the price for what is predominantly a male issue. Why? Well, if we journey back in time, you will find that women have always been classed as the more emotional, irrational and hysterical of the two sexes. Our beliefs, wants and rights for centuries took a backseat simply because of our genetic makeup. Now, I'd be lying if I said that things hadn't improved for us since the 1800s, but there are some social constructs that are very much in place today. Here in the UK and Northern Ireland, the topic of the gender pain gap continues to spark some pretty fiery debates. Shockingly, prior to the early 1990s, women were often excluded from medical studies and clinical trials. The general consensus was, if it works for the hot dog, it should work for the taco. Right? Wrong. Due to this massive oversight in our medical history, women have experienced adverse side effects from medications for centuries. But that's not all. Just out of curiosity, how many of you watching and listening right now have visited your doctor or local emergency room in extreme pain only to be told that you're just sensitive or that perhaps your symptoms are psychosomatic? Actually, just for fun, let's do a show of hands in the comments section because I know for a fact that it's not just one of us. Some of you may be thinking, that was a lovely wee story, Megan, but what does it have to do with true crime? Well, it's not about the topic, it's more about what it represents for us as women. We can't seem to ever have our experiences, our pain, our traumas taken seriously. Whether we're reporting a mystery illness or a horrific sexual assault, all we want is to be heard and, most importantly, believed. Every day I'm both inspired and infuriated by stories of women just like you and I who were finally brave enough to stand up against their attackers, only to be further victimised by the general public, media and law enforcement. In society, we're programmed to ask questions like, why didn't she leave him? Why didn't she fight back? Why did she go to his hotel room? In reality, we should be asking, why is violence against women still a huge issue and why have we done nothing to help stop it? Tonight, everyone, we will be discussing the first in a series of 3 cases in which female victims and survivors were not taken seriously on the path to justice. And to all those doubtful chads out there, I have one humble request. Just listen, and who knows, you might even believe me. When we start a relationship with someone, whether that be a romantic connection or just a friendship, we're often meeting their best self. People don't tend to reveal their true natures until you've gotten a chance to properly get to know them. So, when you head out on a first date or spark up a conversation over the water cooler at work, you're likely socialising with this person's representative. Most of us try and make a good first impression on a new friend or love interest, and as the relationship develops, so does the bond between you, allowing you to let down those walls and welcome them into your life. They've taken the time to show you kindness, love, and unwavering loyalty, but then all of a sudden, one day, they change. As a young child, Clare Wood lived a fairly average life in Batley, Yorkshire with her mum Sheila and younger brother Adam. She was in the local Brownies and eventually moved on to the Girl Guides, which is basically like the UK's version of the Girl Scouts. In 1979, Clare's mum Sheila married a Scottish man and he instantly took to her 2 kids. Michael Brown, originally from Aberdeen, thrived in this new role as a stepdad, and when Clare was 15, he legally adopted both she and Adam. Brown was the only stable father figure Clare had ever known, and right up until his passing in July 2020, he would continue to prove his love and devotion for his daughter. Clare was described as a very happy child who developed a love for fashion and art. She was very into crafting and was really creative. After high school, Clare, now 16, got a job working in a clothing factory. This allowed her to spend the majority of her weekends clubbing with friends in the city of Manchester, which was just an hour away from sleepy Batley on the train. She loved going out, and by the time she was 18, she spent a lot of time in the city just enjoying life. It was during a night out clubbing that she met a handsome young man who soon became quite a serious boyfriend. Michael, Clare's dad, took a shine to her new guy and described him as the ideal son-in-law. The couple settled down, getting married and having a child of their own, a little girl named Maddie. Clare's parents doted on their first grandchild, and it seemed as though everything had finally fallen into place for the family. Unfortunately, fate would have other ideas, and sadly, in 2004, Clare and the father of her child split up. According to Dad Michael, she became restless with domestic life and felt like she had missed out on things having gotten married so young. Her parents understandably were against the breakup. They loved their son-in-law and felt as though Clare would later live to regret her decision. Initially, Maddie stayed with her dad in Manchester while Clare moved to Carlisle for a bit in the hopes of finding herself. Whilst living up north, she dated a couple of guys but nothing serious, and eventually she moved back home to be closer to Maddie. Clare and her ex shared custody of their only daughter, and whilst Maddie visited with her dad, the single mum found herself feeling lonely. In February 2005, Sheila passed away from cancer, and of course this was a devastating loss for everyone. However, the death of her mother had left Clare in a particularly vulnerable position. She was in her 30s, unemployed at the time, and had just lost her best friend after the breakdown of her marriage. It was a lot. And after moving to Salford, just 30 minutes from Manchester, Clare started frequenting online dating sites. She was hoping to find a partner and someone she could share her life with, but after a few dead-end conversations, it would seem that she wasn't having very much luck in her pursuit of romance. She wasn't asking for much. In fact, in the bio section, she'd put, "Just looking for a relatively sane man in my area." Clare had pretty much given up hope. That was until she received a Facebook message from George Appleton in the spring of 2007. From the beginning, Clare's friends and family struggled to see what had attracted her to 40-year-old Appleton. He wasn't what you would describe as conventionally attractive, and even though he worked for a travelling carnival on and off, he relied on unemployment benefits to get by financially. Michael Brown had some pretty strong feelings about George when Clare first introduced them. At the time, Michael was a prison officer for Her Majesty's Prison Service in Leeds, and he could spot a bad egg from a mile away. He asked Clare why George wasn't working. She explained that he had a criminal record for a prior driving offence and that had affected his ability to get a job. Michael was dubious, to say the least. He'd seen plenty of men pass through the system and get on the career ladder just fine. He felt as though George might be lying about the severity of his criminal history. Later it would be revealed that his fatherly instincts were dead right. Despite her dad's warnings, Clare continued to date Appleton, choosing to give him the benefit of the doubt. However, it wasn't just Michael who was wary of the relationship. Clare's brother Adam called their dad after meeting his sister's new man for the first time. Like Michael, he had this sixth sense that something nasty was bubbling underneath George's friendly exterior. According to Clare's friends, the seasonal fairground worker was a Jack the Lad type, always making jokes, and seemed quite charming at first. He appeared to be very understanding of the fact that Clare had a young daughter, and when Maddie would visit, the three spent a lot of time together. For the first few months, Michael did his best to keep his strong opinions to himself. He told Clare that because of George's criminal past, he'd have to maintain a safe distance. Here in the UK, members of law enforcement and Her Majesty's Prison Service can't be seen consorting with ex-cons. Clare was disappointed but understood and still made an effort to see her dad away from George. In early 2008, Appleton told Clare of his plans to propose, which she then relayed to her father. Safe to say, Michael wasn't best pleased and told her that he didn't like her choice of man and that essentially he thought George was a loser. And let's be honest, guys, he really was. He'd been leeching off part-time cleaner Clare for months, and without her, he really had nothing going for him, a fact he was all too aware of. For the most part, Clare seemed happy in the relationship, and with talks of marriage now on the table, it looked like her family wouldn't be seeing the back of George Appleton anytime soon. However, in October 2008, Clare would make a shocking discovery, one that would only confirm her loved one's suspicions about her new lover. Just a few months before things had taken a turn in their once fairy tale romance, George had become increasingly possessive, wanting to know who Clare was talking to and where she was at all times. He was practically glued to her hip, something that made seeing her dad very difficult. Unbeknownst to Clare, he was actively trying to isolate her, and during this time, she noticed he'd also become really secretive. His mobile phone was never out of his hand, so that October, she decided to follow her female intuition and take a peek for herself. What she found was every woman's worst nightmare. Dozens of flirty and explicit conversations between the man she loved and random females. When Clare received George's initial message back in 2007, she felt special, but now she could see that he'd sent countless messages to other women, and she was just among the few who took the bait. Betrayed and heartbroken, the mist had finally cleared, and Clare was able to see George for what he really was, a sleazy lowlife going absolutely nowhere. She picked up the phone and called Dad Michael, claiming that she was done and that the relationship with Appleton was over. Of course, he was thrilled by the news, and perhaps somewhat naively, Michael believed that that would be the last he heard of it. Sadly, he couldn't have been more wrong. Following Clare's discovery of George's infidelity, he didn't really take the hint that Clare was very much finished with him and his shenanigans. So, she wrote him a kind but firm breakup letter. There is no easy way to say this, but I don't want to be with you. Too much has happened. I'm so unhappy. I'm at the stage where I don't even like you touching me, and that feeling is never going to go. You still scare me, and I can't be with someone I'm frightened of. Don't contact me. That's the way it needs to be. I need to get on with my life. If you have any feeling for me, you will let me do this. Don't use this as an excuse to go off the rails. Bear in mind, you were lucky enough to not go to prison again, and I did give you a chance. And I had to do this by letter because you just won't listen to me at all. I've told you before how I feel, and you've chosen to ignore it, hoping it will all go away. It hasn't. Each day, I feel worse. I have to consider my daughter. After all that you've done, I can't have you back. It's not fair on her, and she knows I would never be happy with you. She can never trust you either. Take care. I mean it. Claire. This is when things turned very risky for Claire. As a lot of you will know, the most dangerous time for any woman in an abusive relationship is when they try to leave their abuser. George, enraged at Claire's rejection of him, ups the ante and turns up on her doorstep demanding that she let him inside. We can safely say that she's probably quite scared of him at this point. He's a manipulative cheat with what she thinks is a minor criminal record. As it would turn out, Claire had no idea of who she was dealing with. As far as she's concerned, Appleton's just your typical narcissistic ex, but in reality, he's also a violent predator. During one of his many unwanted visits to her property, George proceeds to break down the front door and enter Claire's home. To her utter shock, he attempts to sexually assault his former girlfriend, but she's able to fight him off. And before leaving, he threatens her with a hot iron and says he'll happily burn down the house as she sleeps, with both she and little Maddie inside. On October 7, 2008, a terrified and traumatised Claire contacts the Pendleton police, and George is arrested and taken into custody, but he wouldn't stay there for very long. Despite his despicable criminal history, which, don't worry, we'll get into it later, he's released on bail, and Claire is once again left unprotected. The terms of his bail require George to stay away from Claire's residence. However, this was soon dismissed after he claimed that he was staying with a close friend who lived in her street. This loophole gave Appleton a free pass to continue to terrorise Claire. So now, this unhinged almost rapist is out on the streets and able to walk by Claire's house whenever he likes without consequence. In the months that followed, there was no progression in the case against George, and this lack of urgency gave Claire almost a false sense of security. If the police thought she was in any danger, they would have told her, right? Simultaneously, Appleton eases up in his harassment efforts. He stops coming by, and for a while, it seems as though he's finally given up. Claire, who's just desperate to move on at this point, decides to then drop the charges against him, hoping she can now put this entire nightmare behind her. Unfortunately, this was exactly what George had been hoping for, and immediately after she dropped the charges, he was back at it, tormenting Claire. It would be a whole year before Michael would uncover the depths of his daughter's suffering. That Christmas, the family enjoyed a wonderful festive dinner and huddled round the tree opening presents. Claire never once let on that anything was bothering her. Those memories must have been so bittersweet for her friends and loved ones, as now they're left to wonder if she'd only opened up to them sooner, she might still be here today. Spending the holidays alone must have somehow been a trigger for George, because in January 2009, he came back more persistent and meaner than ever. Claire could hardly leave the house out of fear that he was watching her every move, which he was. Having faced no real repercussions for his behaviour, George continued to stalk Claire, and only a couple of weeks after Christmas, he forced his way into her Salford home and viciously sexually assaulted her. Claire reported the attack to local law enforcement, but because she'd had those prior charges against him dropped, police didn't exactly take her claims seriously, and the rape charge was quickly dropped due to a lack of physical evidence. If only they'd taken a look into George's violent past, they would have noticed this clear pattern of escalation. That same year, Claire bravely reached out to a local victim support charity, the Salford Independent Domestic Abuse Support Service, who offered to help Claire change her locks and supply her with both new smoke detectors and a panic alarm. They also put a covering over her letterbox, as George had previously threatened to set fire to the home in the middle of the night. As great as this all was, Claire was still living on edge, waiting for her abusive ex to darken her doorstep once more. Maddie, Claire's only child and now a proud advocate for ending violence against women, would later go on to say that at this time, her mother felt isolated and frustrated. In her mind, it didn't matter how many times she reported Appleton, because no one ever believed her. If you're familiar with the topic of domestic violence, then you will know that it's very common for victims to drop charges against their partners out of fear, denial, coercion, and the need for it all to just go away. Sadly, this is exactly what abusers want, because they know that it will undermine their victims' credibility should they ever try to report them again in the future. It's almost like the boy who cried wolf scenario, and that's exactly what Claire was now up against. She reported George 4 times to the local authorities, but there was never any measures put into place to stop him from seeing her. Was he told to leave it alone? Yeah, but nothing was done when he didn't. Claire went to bed every single night wondering if she'd wake up to her home engulfed in flames. She was constantly looking around when she left the house, scared that Appleton was hiding in the bushes nearby. It was no way to live, and I think it's safe to say that Claire was very much a prisoner in the weeks before her death. The beginning of a new year is always a really hard time for people. It's cold, dark, wet, and with Christmas now on the back burner for another 12 months, everyone's pretty much just waiting for summer. So, when 36-year-old Claire didn't respond to her ex-husband's messages on the 6th of February, I'm sure he assumed that she was suffering from a case of the winter blues. Claire had been to hell and back in the last few weeks, so no one could blame her for taking some time to herself. However, one thing just didn't sit right. Maddie was her everything, and she wouldn't have just missed a scheduled visit from her. Alarm bells started to ring, and her ex decided to give Claire's dad Michael a call to see what was going on. Michael was equally as baffled and even sent a text to his daughter telling her to, quote, get the finger out and contact Maddie. Sensing that something more sinister was at play, Maddie's dad went to his ex-wife's home on St. Simon's Street. It was that same afternoon that the charred remains of Claire Wood were discovered in the master bedroom. It was later determined by the coroner, Jennifer Leeming, that Claire had been beaten, sexually assaulted and strangled before her body was then set alight. This vicious killing was like nothing local law enforcement had ever seen, and quickly the identity of a prime suspect emerged. Michael Brown, Claire's father, received the news just as his shift as a prison officer wrapped up. At first, he assured himself that this must have been some kind of mistake, but it quickly dawned on him that there had been no mix-up and that George Appleton had finally made good on his threats. While Claire's ex tried to grapple with the responsibility of telling Maddie that her mother was dead, police launched a manhunt for Appleton. This time was particularly frightening for Claire's loved ones because not only did they have to come to terms with her murder, but they also had to sit there knowing her rapist and killer was still on the loose. Who's to say he wouldn't come looking for them too? As investigators processed the grisly scene bit by bit, they were able to piece together just what had taken place on the night Claire was murdered. 3 days before her family discovered her remains, Claire was in bed when George broke into her home and attacked her in a blind rage. Claire's panic alarm button sat untouched nearby. She didn't even get the chance to grab it during the assault. After learning what had happened to his daughter, of course Michael wanted nothing more than his daughter's killer caught and brought to justice. Sadly, that too would be ripped away from him. Alerts were issued for all major transport links, and Detective Superintendent Pete Jackson even made a public appeal directly to George. Several women who previously dated him came forward claiming that Appleton had contacted them via social media. Just hours after Claire's murder, he was already on the hunt for his next victim. He'd well and truly snapped, and it was only a matter of time before he struck again. Fearing that this was about to escalate into a spree-killing situation, police scoured through local CCTV, searching for any sightings of George. On the 12th of February, 40-year-old George Appleton's car, a red Ford Escort, was located at a derelict building in Blackfriars, Salford. He was found inside, having hung himself in order to evade justice for his disgusting crimes. Was this extremely frustrating for Michael and the rest of Claire's family? Of course, but at least now they never had to worry about George hurting another woman ever again. An inquest into his death confirmed that George had indeed committed suicide, and with that, Claire's loved ones began to try to make sense of what had happened to their daughter, friend, and former partner. Early on in his research, Michael Brown, Claire's adoptive father, was able to see that the police had grossly mishandled the case against George. He was horrified to find out that not only had Appleton raped his daughter more than once, but that this wasn't his first violent offence. You see, George had told Claire he'd been in prison for a motor vehicle violation, when, in truth, he'd actually been sentenced to 3 years behind bars for kidnapping a former girlfriend at knife point in 2002. 1 year prior, he'd been arrested and charged with the harassment of another partner and served 6 months in prison. Both of these women had protective orders against George, but he just kept coming. Carol Agnew actually met him through mutual friends, but their romance quickly turned sour. After a few months of dating, it was made clear to Carol that he wasn't a good guy, and when she tried to end it, things only worsened. She would receive anonymous phone calls at all hours, and sometimes George would turn up at her door demanding that she let him in. On several occasions, Carol would be walking home, only to have that feeling of being watched wash over her. She'd then turn around and see George's car creeping along the road behind her. As if that wasn't unhinged enough, she'd received a call from a local police station claiming that there had been an incident and that they needed to collect a dead body from Carol's house. Rightfully so, she took this as a threat and reported George for harassment. George Appleton was a very dangerous man, and anyone looking through these reports and prior convictions would be able to work out where this was heading. So why, when Clare raised the alarm, did no one listen? Michael Brown found himself asking that very same question. Clare's experiences clearly show that George hadn't been rehabilitated from his stint behind bars, and in fact, he was only getting more violent. At no time during her conversations with police was she warned or even made aware of Appleton's criminal past. It was only after he sexually assaulted her that she realised just what a monster he really was. Even if they didn't feel right disclosing this sensitive information directly to Clare, they should have taken her accusations more seriously. Had Clare known the truth about George's past, she wouldn't have ever gone near him, and she perhaps would have been able to protect herself better. Michael, who was mainly in the dark about how bad things had been, offered for Clare to come stay with him after the breakup, but she declined, wanting to stay close to Maddie and her friends in Salford. The fact is that Clare didn't find out who George really was until it was too late. And had there been better resources out there, Maddie might not have been left to grow up without her mum. It was determined that police mishandling led to the failed conviction of George Appleton. However, there has never been a formal apology provided to Clare's family, and no legal action was taken against those responsible for this colossal display of incompetence. After the death of his daughter, Michael Brown wanted to ensure that no woman would ever suffer at the hands of a monster simply because they didn't have access to the right information. Together, he and Labour MP Hazel Blears created Clare's Law, a bill that provides both men and women with the right to ask if their partner has a violent criminal history. One male MP who was against the bill questioned Michael, asking, "What about men's rights?" Michael quietly took off his shoes and placed them on the table before stating, "I don't wish to be melodramatic, but my daughter was beaten, raped, strangled, and set on fire. For the last minutes of her life, she was alone. Stand in my shoes and tell me how that feels." Since its inception in 2014, Clare's Law has helped thousands of women and men escape toxic partnerships before it was too late. You might be unsure if Clare's Law is the right option for you. If your partner is exhibiting concerning red flags, you can now contact law enforcement and request for their criminal record to be shared. You can also ask on the behalf of a close friend or family member if you feel that they may be in danger. In 2023 alone, over 45,000 applications were submitted across England, Scotland and Wales, which is a 300% increase over the last 5 years. Everyone deserves to be a part of a kind and loving partnership, and everyone deserves to know who they're sleeping next to at night. Clare's Law, also known as the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, is an inspirational legacy, one that is carried on by Clare's daughter Maddie after Michael's tragic passing in July 2020. However, this is not a foolproof solution, and here's where we need your help. Earlier this year, Maddie, now in her early 20s, made a plea to the public to help spread awareness of Clare's Law. Not enough people know that this valuable resource is available, and unfortunately, many women are falling through the cracks. According to UK law, law enforcement agencies have 28 days to respond to a Clare's Law disclosure request. In reality, some are taking months, even years, to get in touch with victims who could be trapped in a potentially dangerous situation. Maddie explains that this is not what her grandfather worked so hard for, and it won't be tolerated. When asked by BBC News what was causing these inconsistencies, many police forces blamed understaffing due to government budget cuts. According to investigative reporter Caroline Bilton, access to Clare's Law has become somewhat of a postcode lottery, one that could cost another young woman her life. It's an incredible tool in ending violence against women, one that no longer allows these offenders to hide behind a mask of lies. Please, all I'm asking is that you pop into the link in the description box below, give it the old copy and paste, and share it on whatever social media platforms you have available. Do you have a friend or family member who has their own concerns about their significant other? In a private and safe space, share what you know about Clare's Law with them. It could potentially save their life. I would love to see Clare's legacy spread across the pond to the US, so please share her story far and wide. As women, we're often outmatched when it comes to physical strength and speed, so anything we can do to bridge that gap is a huge bonus. The more we spread awareness, the more we end the stigma in reporting instances of sexual and domestic violence. I don't know about you, but I want my nieces to grow up in a world where if I bravely come forward to report a crime, they'll believe me. I hope you found this week's episode informative. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up for me. It really helps this wee channel of mine. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. And if you're listening over on Spotify, don't forget to leave a big, juicy 5-star review. Are you a fan of all things spooky? Then check out our fact or fiction horror podcast, Here She Lies, available on both YouTube and Spotify. We have 2 more heartbreaking cases to come in our Believe Me series, so head over to our Instagram page at Killer Weekend Podcast for more updates. If you or anyone you know have been affected by the topics covered in tonight's show, I'll pop a couple of links to some amazing organisations in the description box below, along with the details for Clare's Law. Don't forget to share Clare's Law, it really could save a life. I love you all so much, so please remember to lock your doors, don't talk to strangers, and maybe don't be a creep who targets women online. See ya! Big kisses. Mwah.